Hey everybody, welcome back to the channel. So today what we're going to be discussing is how you have better positioning in Apex Legends. This is a highly requested video from you guys, and what I'm going to do is timestamp everything, and I have Sarah here who's going to be helping out into today's video discussing the positioning. What we're going to start off first with is high ground versus low ground. You see I'm on the low ground and she is on the high ground. So let's segue into that. Now, a common occurrence is everybody will be holding the high ground position, but what I would like to show you first of what it looks like when you're on the low ground. So Sarah here is on the height, and you see that her hitbox is really small. This is a common thing that you hear pros say, is that the disadvantage here is that I have a larger hitbox, which I'm going to switch POVs in just a second, and I'm going to highlight why it's such an advantageous position to have the high ground. Realistically, all I can see from here is her head, and even if I take different angles, my whole frontal body is going to be apparent. So in this next cut here, we're going to switch positions, and I'd like to showcase that to you. Now that we've switched POVs, having the high ground, this is what it looks like. So you see you have even more of an advantage here. From before, you saw my hitbox was really small, and only realistically all you can see was the head of, well, your enemy opponent. So when you have the high ground here, the best thing to do is really duck and weave and poke at different angles. So if you're going to keep this advantageous position, you can peek here, you can slide across and peek at a different angle. Never peek the same area twice. You're going to hear me repeat that consistently throughout today's videos. Never peek the same angle. So if you're going to take a different angle and position, because this does happen where you have height and the enemy does manage to nail a really strong shot and push up. So what I'm going to do again is we're going to switch angles and talk about how you can keep the low ground and how to keep it as a strong advantageous positioning. Now when you're on the low ground, realistically you're not going to be put in any sort of good positioning. So the best thing you can do besides just standing out in the open is take an angle here and make your hitbox equally as small. Now the downside when you're down here is that you can get grenaded out and pushed to a different position. So the best thing you can do is utilize your abilities. Let's say you were to take a shot and you see them right above, and you see them and you take a shot and you manage to get a kill there in that situation. Well, then at that point now you're in a 3v2 situation and you can push. The best thing you can do if you are an Octane, well, you could utilize this jump pad, or let's say you're low but you can queue up to a higher position and take an angle. So that's definitely a plus side of what you can do in this scenario, is utilize your utility. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to break away to a clip where I got completely decimated and destroyed despite having the high ground. So let's take a look at that clip. Look how scared they are to open it. Oh, hello.
Hello?
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 Oh my god.
Oh my god.
Now let's discuss the more difficult part about holding high ground. When you're holding high ground, the most uncomfortable thing is actually shooting towards a low ground positioning. Because it's such an awkward spin, let's say you're up top and they're directly below you. Sarah, if you will, can you land or move yourself right here in this scenario? This is a little bit easier to hit if they, let's say they were right there, but when they're directly below you, the way the camera moves left and right, because there's only so far down that you can look, where this starts to become a bit of a disadvantage compared to somebody who's looking up. So if you were looking straight up and they were right there, it's much easier to hit them and garner at least some movement compared to being all the way from above looking down below. So remember, your positioning is important, and whenever you're holding these angles, height is most likely always going to be the best positioning that you can have. And the only way to counter it is by utilizing abilities or taking various angles at the same time to overthrow your enemy in their positioning, especially if the positioning from high ground has different areas. So if I look at the area over here and we see this, climb height, you realize that your weak spots are going to be here where they can climb, and of course here. Most of the time high ground is always generally a more flat aerial surface, so you want to make sure that your angles are covered to ensure that you do not get run up on. But the same thing when you're taking low ground, the downside also can be the geometry and the limited areas to being exposed to grenades. Now another form of interesting positioning is where technically this would be considered the high ground. Now this is an advantageous position whenever you have the high ground here, but the downside to it is once the enemy is pushed up, your hitbox is much smaller than your enemy's. Notice how all she can do is really strafe back and forth, and let's switch POVs for a second. If you will, Sarah, go right there. You'll notice that the hitbox is much smaller compared to my hitbox. She has more of an area to duck and weave, and I have less of an advantage here. All I can do is really take a different angle or cut another angle, but it's still, no matter what, my hitbox is going to be strategically much larger than hers will. So you never really want to be in this scenario. You would think that this is a disadvantage, fighting near stairs or high ground. I'm going to showcase another example where you're running up on a hill, and this scenario happens a ton. So you got to make sure to fend off your enemies to make sure they do not utilize the smaller hitbox. If you realize that your hitbox is much larger than the enemies, your best course of action is to reposition like as quickly as possible. This happens all the time. I made this mistake. I'm going to show you an example of a clip where I made the mistake, and I'm going to showcase that for you now here. Crack. Oh my god.
Oh my god.
I'm pushing this. Oh, right here? Oh my god, I'm so dead. I'm sorry, Sarah. Now, in terms of positioning, whenever you're holding a hill, you would think that, again, high ground is the most advantageous positioning here. Now, if somebody's running up, Sarah's going to move just up a little further here on this hill. But she's making her hitbox as small as possible. My hitbox is still fully exposed here, so we're going to swap POVs here. I'm going to show you. See how using this, her hitbox is much larger and mine was much smaller? You're still using the hill as cover. And you would think that you're camping, but you're realistically not. So what happens if you are in this negative scenario? So Sarah, if you can stand here for just 2 seconds.
I bet we'll find something good here.
Now, the best thing you can do, and this happens a lot, notice how I'm now using this hill and crevice right here and making my hitbox infinitely smaller and for her to push up. So let's say she pushes up and tries to ego push just a little bit. I am now instantly harder to hit at this angle. Now, the opposite way to get somebody out of this sort of crevice is to grenade them out. So Sarah, if you will, hide in that crevice right there. You see how much smaller that is. Now, the plus side is that you will have an easier shot in terms of a headshot, but the downside is that my hitbox is infinitely larger. So remember, that is the key whenever you're trying to find positioning and your overall goal. So we're going to showcase another one when you're utilizing a ramp rather than hills and overall geometry. Now, here's another great example in terms of holding various geometry. So yes, you have cover and you're holding here, but the minute you side peek, your whole body has to be exposed. Realize where she is standing here, and also how small her hitbox is. Now, if you have a sniper, yes, this will be a little bit easier to hit, but realize if she's using a full automatic weapon, how much easier it is to definitely fry me here. So we're going to swap places. She's going to stand behind this geometry right here.
Let's go here.
Leave a like for every time I say geometry or if I talk about various height areas. Now here, you'll see where you can pop up from different angles. Never peek the same area twice. So if I go back, and let's say this is your only course of action of really all you can do, is your best thing that you can do is peek here and throw them off and try to peek at the other angle. And if you're just getting absolutely destroyed and obliterated, you need to take a reposition, utilize your Wraith's tactical ability, and take now equal footing across over here. So I'm going to showcase next is what happens when you're in the scenario and just a clean 1v1. But now you see, if Sarah peeks her head out, if you will real quick, that we are now on equal footing. Our bodies showcase the same amount exposed, and realistically it's up to who has the better precision, and once a knock does happen, that is when you can engage on the enemy. Now, what I'm showcasing here is what every pro player practices whenever they are in a 1v1 encounter. Why is this such good practice? Is because, well, you're practicing on keeping your hip fire or your shots right above the waist. Instead of just doing a 1v1 where, let's say, you're standing right in front of each other. Let's have Sarah stand here.
Let's go here.
There's so much more that you can hit and less room for error. It's helpful, but realistically your 1v1s, if everyone's taking appropriate geometry and cover, is going to be utilized right in front of them this way. This is why a lot of pros will use this angle, because you're having to shoot from the waist up and land those headshots to really secure that quick fight and dub. Now, the next big advice that I can provide to you guys is whenever you're in a common fight, let's say you're fighting around a car, let's say you're fighting around a rock, anything of that nature, the best thing to really do is really fight and try to find your hitbox and angle. The biggest thing individual players will do is they'll jump and try to take height immediately, but you have to be also mindful of if the enemy is holding their position and angle immediately. This is more or less like a game of chess and a game of, it's a mind game essentially. You want the enemy to make the first mistake. So if you peek and you get your first shot and you're now damaged, you now can pretty much full send and push. So this is all about, have you been able to get any entry level shots? Do you have more damage in? Are they passive? Are they tentative? Can you see them moving left and right? If the enemy is pretty much standing still, it gives the opponent more room to get more angles and move left and right. So you need to keep ducking and weaving and taking various angles. This is where that super jump whenever you hit this is so beneficial that I didn't nail right there, but also tap strafing and moving around your geometry to overthrow your enemy to throw them off. When they're under pressure, they start to get really, really nervous. And remember, while everyone wants to climb up height immediately, remember that you have to go through an animation. So if the enemy is prepped for it, they could simply, let's say if Sarah were to climb this geometry right here, and climb it, and I had a shotgun out, while they're still in their animation, I will pretty much get burst damage right off the rip. So be mindful of when you climb and when you don't climb, and feel out the pressure of the situation. I have to cut out me coughing. So this is really difficult to read, this is really hard to teach, but the best thing to do is hop into a 1v1 scenario here, and every opponent that you're going to face is going to have a little bit of a different tactic. Sometimes I've used a tactic of just holding, waiting with the massive shot, and then jumping the minute they try to get up height and do that burst damage, and then slide around to the right. So again, a game of chess, a game of wits, and it's a mind game essentially to try to juke them and get them to make a fatal mistake, and that's the overall goal. Now every pro player tells you to hold the high ground. I said it many times already in this video. Another point and example whenever you're holding height of how bad of positioning this realistically is. You need to make sure that you are closer to the wall, that you have an angle, because if you're just holding out in an open area or an open cliff, you can see, even if I have better cover, why my positioning is much easier to hold. I can duck and weave, and she has absolutely nowhere to go from here. She could have a better positioning up higher to knowing that her back is secured, or she could get thirded if she's on the lower part. But you have to make sure, even if you have height, that it's more or less significant height, and that the way up is harder to get up to. Because remember, if I need to push this and she has this ultimate height in this position here, this makes it much harder for me to push. Essentially, I could get shot all the way in, and even if I come up these stairs and angles, by the time I come up here, if she's holding this spot right here, this is a full frontal view. So if you will, Sarah, stand right here.
Find something good here.
Let's say you make the mistake and the enemy does push up completely. At least you can hold here and make your hitbox as small as possible, ideally, and land your shots. Now, if you are coming up the stairs and they are not holding this yet, let's say if Sarah's holding this spot, and this is a common mistake new players will make, is if they're standing right here, notice how my hitbox is now smaller. This is much harder for her to hit than it is for me to hit here. So that is a positioning device. Or you can use your abilities. You can use a Horizon Tactical. You can use an Octane Jump Pad to get equal footing. But realize whenever you push, you don't always just want to land. Let's say if I'm pushing right now, you do not want to just land on equal footing and just start 1v1ing. This can work if you're trying to overthrow an enemy that does not know what they're doing and feels very uncomfortable in Apex Legends. But if this is talking Masters, Diamond, and Pred level ranked, you're most likely going to just trade, and it's not going to be the most ideal because you're all coming up one at a time. And if all three of them are up here ready for you, pretty much you're getting shot on the way up, and they don't have positioning. If they're smart, they're going to be covering these angles. So what we're going to talk about next is how to breach a building, and why pro players, as they're moving upwards, seem like they always have cover and angles when they're actually playing extremely smart. Now, you've probably seen a lot of pro players push as a Gibraltar. I'm going to use him as he has a lot of pushing power here in this example. Remember, this was a really strong positioning that was there before, right? So what we're going to do is we're going to work our way in. So you probably see a lot of pro teams really push, and they don't necessarily just take the route like this and they just barrel in. This never happens. Every casual player really feels like this is the most what they see, but this is not what they're actually doing. So what they're going to do is when they make their push is that they'll do a little bit of damage, take their shots, put some cover down, make them nervous, get a crack, and then they'll instantly move up. Now they have this little spot here to put some cover on. And then they'll come around this corner, do a little bit more damage, they'll take some shots, and they'll keep moving up, and they'll move to the next spot over here. Now, if they have an open field and they want to push forward and make a play, you'll probably see them throw the bubble right forward, and they'll push as a group. And now they're pretty much an equal footing. You'll see them just start lasering and taking angles and completely overwhelm their opponent. So this is really, really important as you see pro players push. You can use this example in so many different scenarios, is that they don't always take the direct courses, that they're constantly doing pick damage, and the minute there's damage taken, know that they have to heal. And if they have to heal, it means they do not have their gun out. And if they don't have their gun out, it means you are free to push and rotate. Remember, if there's an open field between you and the enemy, that is when you utilize your utility. That is when you use your bubble. That is when you use your Octane Jump Pad. That is when you use your utility to push in and try to get an angle. It's when you use your Horizon Q to get some damage in. Now remember, the downside to using a Horizon Q every time whenever you push is that you are just flying up in the air and free. So if they're all right there, this is a mistake Horizons make, is that all three of them have the visibility to shoot you out of the air. So while this seems like it would be the best way to push, it's not always going to be the case if everyone is focused on you. Now, it can be a smart tactic to send your Horizon up. It's pretty much a big Hail Mary, while the other two make a push forward. the biggest thing whenever you're pushing in terms of positioning, if somebody has such a strong angle, because this is a very powerful angle to hold when all you see is their head. Now, realistically, how you're going to achieve that is by giving your enemy options. So let's say the enemy lifeline is peeking around this corner. So let's say she's peeking her head, right? And the Gibraltar and the enemy are both barreling forward too. And you have the horizon in the air. You have now given your opponents, if they are not calming, a split amount of damage between the two in front and the one up in the sky. The one up in the sky is going to be doing the most damage, which is the horizon, and you realize that this team now has the most amount of pressure. Now, another thing pro players will utilize is grenades. You use grenades and you try to get a stick and you throw it up in the air, and if you get damage, you know immediately to push, because even though this is an open field, this positioning would be horrible, absolutely horrible to push on. But if they are all cracked, and even if they were to peek over the angle, a good player will instantly know that they can land all of those shots, and it'll be a deficit of 100 HP versus my full armor at 200 HP. So you have to use the timing and the openings, because remember, a battery takes significantly less amount of time to just full heal compared to a med kit. So just be mindful of their armors and how much HP you have versus your armors. So let's say you're in the scenario where you're getting pushed and you realize that all the information you're getting, if you have if you have low armors, let's say we only have whites or blues and they have reds and purples. If they get a crack and they know that they're in an advantage in terms of HP, rest assured that they're going to be pushing. At that point, the best thing you can do is reposition with the Gibby bubble and try to back up and have them make a mistake, getting one of them caught out in the open. You can put a zip line to get away over to height somewhere. You can use a jump pad to take a different position, perhaps behind this wall over here. So if you had the jump pad and you were trying to get away and get to different positioning, retreating to different positioning does not necessarily mean that you're at a disadvantage. It will be a disadvantage if you take positioning and you get yourself completely stuck at a back angle. So just try to be smart with your positioning and know when you retreat. It's definitely a big sign that you're not confident, even if you have a stronger ankle, and that they're going to keep pushing forward. So it's not a sign of weakness. Know that just a simple reposition can really cause your enemies to make a mistake. This happens all the time with pred players who are extremely confident with their aim and their positioning to get them caught out. Now remember, do not camp. I repeat, do not camp when you have these angles. All you're doing is giving your enemy more time to formulate a plan of how they're going to push you. This is what pro players, and whenever, especially when I see enemies that are hunkered down, let's say there's a rampart Watson fences, all you're giving time is to break down the structure. You'll see them take various angles, trying to make the geometry small, and they will instantly bat and heal. But if they are cracked and somebody is rotating over to the left and taking height and taking a different angle, you'll see them do this. You'll see everybody taking various angles, and now this positioning, which was a power play, is now a complete weakness. If this person did a little bit of damage to find an opening here and I took height, I can now snag a frag, and it's now a 3v2. This person healed up and we push in and we secure the squad wipe. Now, a common mistake whenever you have the angle, and let's say you get a little bit of damage, and let's say you realize they're flush. So let's say I shoot and I'm like, oh my god, they're 25 in. You'll see them instantly start cutting this angle this way. This happens a lot for new players. You once had the advantage here. Once you move out this way, you are now at the disadvantage. So if we look at that POV, and we'll switch places here, yes, I'm scared because I have low HP, and I'm scared, but you saw before how small the hitbox was before, and they peek out. This is an easy shot. This is an easy shot unless the enemy is so confident in landing every single shot. It's still a disadvantage and something you should not do. So what should you do if you get them flush? Let's say you get the additional hit, and they come around the corner and not miss your shot, and you get that flush. There you go. You come around, you take this angle and height. Now you're now in a clean 1v1. You can now cut this angle, slide forward, and now you're right in their face because you know you have the health advantage to do so. Now remember, if you're doing that you're most likely going to be taking damage. You want to take the safest approach to minimize as much health loss as humanly possible. So remember, even if you have the advantage and you're wide swinging and they are flush, this happens so many times to me, especially at a high tier level, that what you could do if they're flush and you wanted to reposition, let's say if you were Octane and you were to stim and go at the reposition is take this angle and now cut here if you saw them healing and trying to heal up. So that is where Octane is extremely powerful when you're trying to reposition and take an angle, is if you're trying just to slide jump. And remember, you're exposed for just a moment, and now you have this cross. What you need to do is have your opponent take this other angle and slowly breach up on top of them. Now, this is also an extremely horrible position to take. Now, the downside, if you do have them at a disadvantage, is if you are here and the two enemies are here and here, this positioning is now extremely weak because now you have 3 targets hitting you instead of 1. The reason I'm highlighting this positioning is that most players always make this mistake on pushing on one person, which is the ideal goal, to isolate somebody, but remember to always keep track of your enemies in terms of positioning, because it will make what would be a strategic positioning right here a complete weakness when you know your whole body, if you stand up there for me real quick, Sarah, is now a disadvantage. They got the full hitbox, and they're right here swinging back and forth, and they're going to lose that fight. Let's highlight some unique geometry together here. Geometry said again, got to be sure to leave a like. So what we're seeing here is that this is going to be your best spot if you're taking an open field, and let's say the zone is closing and they have height over here. Now, the best positioning is to have multiple team members hold different angles. All of them holding the same angle is going to spell death. See how small their hitbox is here? And also how small mine is. This is pretty much equal footing despite having the higher ground. So if I switch places, I want you to showcase just how small that hitbox is. Remember showcasing the hill. This is a common thing that will happen. Let's say you're ending around stairs, and there you go. You see? Now the downside here, just remember that it's much easier to duck and weave out of the bottom area. That if I'm up top, remember, do not peek the same area twice. I cannot stress that enough. If you take a shot here and all you do is wide swing and you pick the same area, I promise you're going to get absolutely obliterated. Now, one thing to do is make sure that you do not take the same area with your teammates, because while you have ultimate height up here, you do not have as many options. Notice how her hitbox is much bigger, but the downside for the top end is that there's less for you to peek from. Now, if there's 2 people up here, this is whenever things get really bad. Do not share the same positioning as your fellow teammates. Take different angles, take different approaches. So if I'm here, and there's somebody at this angle on the right over here, and there's the person in the front right here, you have so many angles and positioning. So while you may have optimal positioning, remember that your teammates are also what holds you back in terms of holding optimal positioning as well. Because if you're all trying to hold this little spot up top, there's just not enough real estate space up here, it's free real estate, for you to all find your spots and angles. Otherwise, when you're peeking, and I'm going to have Sarah switch places with me just so you can see it, because let's say the zone is closing and you have minimal spots and minimal positioning, and she is up top there, at least you got the clean 1v1 here. But if they're up top there, look how little they have to peek from there, and they can peek from the right, which then exposes their full body positioning on their right. So I made sure I got that right, from left to right. And we're looking at the angles, because this here, if they peek here, is going to be a lot of damage, and what most likely they're going to do whenever they get hit is they'll immediately drop to the space right behind them, which gives a positioning at that point, if nobody is here and everyone's bunched up over here, for you to immediately take the height from them, and now you are at the advantage immediately if they jump down to heal. This happens all of the time, and just realize while you believe that you have that height advantage, how much it can turn into a disadvantage, knowing that if you get hit, you need your teammates to provide crossfire, to provide cover. So if somebody is instantly cracked, you know that the enemy is going to push, you need to instantly provide cover to them. So if you see that jump pad go out, or you see the Octane push, you need to make sure to provide the crossfire. Now, how do you know when it's appropriate to push? Well, all your teammates need to push in with you. So what you need to do whenever you're pushing is, if this person does fully expose themselves to provide cover fire and try to take out the jump pad, this person is now taken out of commission. If that person is taken out of commission and 2 of you are pushing and you absolutely fry this person, this is an isolated engagement and fight of a 2v1 scenario. And now all you need to do is take this positioning here, and now you have a strong fight yet again. And you just keep holding it. The things that change up the encounter are the grenades, the utility that you can provide, the Wraith port, the jump pad, the zip, the Pathfinder grapple if you need to get the positioning and fly up there as fast as possible and just start destroying the team that is at that angle. It's where you see TSM roll up with, you know, their Pathfinder. It's where you see a lot of pro teams start to capitalize on that utility and catch enemy teammates out of position. Now, I've technically already done a video called Slicing the Pie whenever you cut the corner, especially when it comes to building. This is very popular within games like Valorant, CSGO. It has some applicable to Apex Legends, but realistically, you don't use it as much, especially whenever you're pushing a building. So Sarah, if you will, if you could stand inside this imaginary building here, pretend there are walls. I'm going to put a fence here, just to set up the stage of an imaginary building. So whenever you're pushing a building, where the strategic advantage comes in if you're slicing the pie and cutting the angle and you see the enemy located right in front of you, the best thing you can do is cut the corner until you find that one target or enemy. You can decide to bounce a grenade off for entry damage there. You can slide jump in, especially if you have a close quarters weapon. Realize that burst damage is more important, so you need to equip yourself a Mastiff, an EVA 8, anything of that nature. You can utilize your bubble to push forward in the scenario to break a bunch of fences. So, Sarah, if you will, can you put a bunch of fences down as Watson in here? And I'll push forward and showcase the power of a Gibraltar bubble. And this is where you see the bubble fights become extremely popular. This is why Gibraltar bubble is great to provide that space, because it creates space where it does not exist. If you throw a Gibraltar bubble right at the door, you instantly have the fences broken. And if the enemy was here, just as you saw Sarah, you'll realize that they cannot cover the door. You can instantly bust down the door and push through, and now you have the space to bubble dance. And once it's gone, you got to make sure, because you remember that the fences are there, just to be sure you don't get caught out of position. So when you're breaching a building and everyone is located in here, remember that it's a very powerful and strategic place to fight, but can also be your ultimate downfall if you're not smart with your angles and your positioning. You do not want everyone inside the building. It's good to have one person keeping watch and putting pressure. This is where everyone tends to make a mistake in terms of camping a building. You don't necessarily camp, you're holding for optimal positioning. So let's say you're here, you need somebody, even like a scout up top, taking an angle, taking positioning, to keep enemy teams at bay, making their hitbox as small as possible. Let's say they manage to do 50 damage in, there's somebody at the doorway here. Otherwise, you're going to have literally a Gibraltar, or let's say a caustic gas just thrown right at the door to push you right immediately and buy them some space where it does not exist. So you want to use those angles in terms of positioning and not be huddled up in one spot, because a building can be extremely powerful, but remember that third parties are just around the corner. Let's say that their push does fail, and I covered this about my third party video, which will have a link in the description down below, that if they're pushing and their push fails, and let's say they just jump pad away and there's a bunch of people who heard the gunfire, the next team will roll up and start harassing your building. You'll be low in resources and you'll have a hard time resetting. So that's the biggest tips I can provide. Just remember to slice the pie, and remember, slicing the pie just means your radius in front of you. So if I'm cutting this angle, I see this, I see this, I see this, I have the doorway. I cut the pie, slice it, slice it, slice it, slice it, slice it, slice, 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 I see their Watson there. And she turns around and looks adorable at you. So what you need to do, and make sure that when you're slicing the pie, are the angles that the enemy could be taking. So if there's a crate in this angle, here's an example that most players will make mistakes, because there's a lot of little nooks and crannies that you can hide between in a building, is try to be unique rather than just standing out in the open. So Sarah, if you will, pretend you're breaching this building.
Let's check out this way.
And coming through. And let's say I'm sitting on a box. I'll have you come in through this way right here. I'll also have a link to Sarah's channel in the description down below, because she's been so patient just helping me out. And they slide through. Well then boom, now you have the advantage to just flank them from right behind. This is a mistake, because there's a lot of boxes and stuff that are located in the building, that if you're located in various boxes and holding different angles, it can really throw off your enemy. And that's what I mean by taking better angles and better positioning. Alright, the last one tip in terms of positioning that we're going to touch upon is, what if all you have in terms of cover is a wall? Well, remember to check your angles, check your corners, especially when you're running around. There could be somebody hiding in this corner. When you cut around, there could be somebody hiding in that angle all the way over there, in that corner, and then you bubble and decide to push them just to provide your team some cover. Check your angles and check your corners. So let's say you're in the position where you're just fighting somebody right behind a wall and you're literally going back and forth between the wall. Remember, whenever you climb up, while this could be an advantage, is now a disadvantage. So remember that even though you're cutting that corner, and to check your angles and slice the pie when you're cutting a wall of where they could be located, you could try to get the advantage, but remember, every time you climb, there's a second where you cannot do anything because you're pulling out your weapon. So if there's a wall here, you could try to get a different angle on the wall, and now they're at a complete disadvantage, and wait for the enemy to make a mistake. That is going to be the biggest tip that I'm going to provide you at the end of the day here as we depart the video. So if you found any of this helpful, don't forget to leave a like, comment, and subscribe, because a realistic thing is wait for your enemy to make the mistake. Because what could be an advantageous position, let's say they were right there waiting and holding the angle, is that you could be bouncing back and forth, and you finally hear them, and then you just fry them as they fly right over the wall. and then boom, you know, you get your HP and they're low. And now you're at a health advantage, and that is when you push. That is whenever you take height and take the positioning and put the pressure. But until that moment, you're waiting for the positioning. So what could happen is you cut around the corner, and let's say I were to be shot. So I'll have Sarah just do a few shots, and I were to be shot and I fall back. Now this is a position for her to continue to fly above the high ground and run right towards me. There's two things I could do. I could be popping a heal, and then or I could just wait for her to try to make the mistake and push and see if I can land enough damage in. You have to kind of feel out, and that's going to be the hardest takeaway of today's video to really showcase at different tiers of lobbies that everyone plays a little differently. So while it would make the most sense where if I were damaged for them to push immediately and for me to hold, what if the player is not as skilled and you hold and they wait a really long time and you could have gotten a battery off? So it's a game of chess, it's a mind game, and feel out what you believe your enemy is going to do. Try to have your teammates scout out and say, are they pushing me? Are they pushing? You know, what do you have time to do? And keep your comms fast and clean and use your utility to reposition if needed. If I got hit immediately, I would probably Wraith Q and reposition and then pop a bat back over here and wait. That my teammates could then cover from here, from anywhere realistically to stop this Watson from pushing. But the minute the Watson pushes and makes a mistake and overextends and gets absolutely shredded, that's whenever I can come right back in at full HP from a battery and continue the encounter. So all these scenarios are going to have variables. You can have the X, the Y, every variable can realistically change from how much height, from how much your hitbox is, and how much can be really beneficial to you as, well, you're trying to win as many encounters. It gets a lot more complicated when you put more squad members into the equation, but I hope this really sets you up for success. We provided a lot of different examples and discuss hitboxes and why you're probably losing a lot of encounters. I provided 2 examples when I made mistakes just last night on this, and even though I know these things, sometimes you just push in, you get a little overconfident, and your confidence can be your biggest beneficiary to you because you know you're going to land your shots, but it can also be your biggest downfall pushing in thinking that you're going to land every single shot when you could run into a 2v1 scenario. Again, thank you, Sarah, for being so helpful for today. Don't forget to leave a like, comment, and subscribe, and I'll see you guys all in the next video.